everything's just disillusionment.
Yeah.
And, everyone is trying to deal with it their own way. But again, we have to have open spaces where we could discuss these issues and might not find the answers, but we might work toward the answers.
Yeah, for those who didn't see this, so he brought this up to me at the beginning, which is fascinating. He went to the back of the book, and this book has an index of films from A to Z, and there are literally 10 pages in small print of movies going back all the way to like the 1920s or however early they started making movies, all the way through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 40s.
And mind you, keep in mind,
of movies that portray
this
Arabs
book is
or
from
Muslims.
2001.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to get at, Mounir, is like you have all these movies that glorify like respect for human rights, freedom, liberty, the oppressed getting justice, the oppressed finding their independence or their sovereignty, liberation, all these themes that were so beautiful in these movies. And to me, if you are a salt of the earth, red-blooded American, if you're a Republican, if you're a military veteran, to me, you should 100% be pro-Palestine and pro-Palestinian when it comes to that question that we keep bringing up, versus being pro-Israel. And I don't mean it in the sense of you have to not be for Israel in any capacity. But what I'm saying is, if you study the issue and you open your heart and your mind and you look at it close enough, there is no way you could convince me that the Palestinian story isn't represented in all those movies more so than the colonialist, settler, Israeli story. Like Crimson Jihad, and they're supposed to be like Middle Eastern, but then they're played by like Indian extras, Indian actors.
They couldn't probably get any decent Arab to say, sure, I'll take that role.
They weren't dignified enough to find like an Arab that would be like, I'll portray my people as being terrorists, sure.
I mean, Tom and Jerry, in fact, has a lot of, it looks like an innocent cartoon to anyone.
Sure.
However, there is a lot of different messages.
All right. Can you hear me okay?
I could hear you perfectly.
All right.
Is this good?
Yeah, we're rolling. We're recording.
Awesome.
Very first time on a podcast, I hear.
Yes.
That's awesome.
Yes.
It's so great to have you.
Good to have you too. Good to see you too.
Yeah. No, hopefully the first of many. I think that you and I were connected through social media, and I remember the thing that definitively stood out in my mind right away when you reached out to me was, and the reason why I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you mentioned one word, and that word just jolted me, and that was disillusioned. Not in a negative sense, but in a sense that I think is human and natural, which is, disillusionment, which I feel like a lot of people right now are experiencing, whether it's Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, Muslim Americans, even just white Americans. Like I know tons of people, family and friends, who are not Arab, who are not Muslim, that have a deep sense of disillusionment right now because of a lot of what's going on in terms of foreign policy, as well as not even foreign policy, stuff that's domestic. People just feel like the dream and the vision and kind of ideals that they were raised on of what it means to be American, what it means to be a Westerner with Western ideals and values have just been undermined and eroded. So when you said that to me, Mounir, I was like, I got to have this guy on and we got to have a conversation. So I'm really happy that you agreed to talk and reached out to me, and I'm excited to have you. So welcome.
Absolutely, brother. Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, maybe give us a little bit of background on yourself as far as what brings you to Chicago and part of this community here.
I mean, I've been living in Chicago and the surrounding suburbs the past 26 years. Loved it. I came here for the American dream, for a better life, to grow as a person, and whether it's financially or emotionally and intellectually as well. It's just that recently, it's just the past 18 months has been an eye-opener as far as all the international law that we have studied about, the UN, the organizations that were supposed to protect human rights, animal rights, all the different rights of humans, just, as you mentioned, eroded right in front of our eyes. And it's just been a
Tough.
shock.
It's been a shock.
It's been a shock.
It's been
That's
tough.
I'm still, we
Processing
are still
everything?
processing.
Yeah.
But it's this time you have to start moving forward with what you have learned, what you have processed, and see what can be done to wake as many people up, including myself, because as you may know, every day few things happen, new things happening. So it's just, you have to look at it with a different perspective each day. And I don't know.
Yeah. No, I feel you, man. Can you maybe, before we get too into some of the topics that maybe we want to discuss, give us a little bit of your background, or what's your original country of origin or nationality, if you don't mind sharing?
So I left Morocco back in 1998.
Okay.
I was 19 years old, not ready to leave the parents' nest yet, because I was not ready in a certain aspects of life.
Sure.
But you have to grow at some point in life.
Yeah.
So came here in Chicago. It's been a pretty good experience. It's been jobs in a blue collar field as well as in a white collar field. Went back to UIC, got my bachelor's degree back in 2013, and it's been plenty of experiences ever since. And
so Morocco, what's funny is that with the minute you mentioned that you're originally from Morocco, I got excited because in, I think my first or second episode, I think it was like maybe my second episode that we did, I was having a discussion with someone and I talked about how many languages Moroccans speak. Like I'm talking, most people don't know this, and it's a little bit of a repeat for those who heard it already, but most Moroccans that I've ever met, I knew several in college and high school, they speak like 3 or 4 languages minimum, sometimes 5, 6 languages.
correct.
Are you super multilingual?
I do speak 3 languages.
That's awesome.
I was working on Spanish as well as Polish, but
Polish.
I have not succeeded yet.
Okay.
I only know a few words here and there. So
And otherwise you
I
speak
can't
Arabic.
hold a conversation. I do speak Arabic.
Do you speak Berber?
No, I do not.
Oh, okay.
I wish they had taught us that in back in school.
Oh, okay.
I wish they had taught
So
us
I
that.
thought, for some reason, like most Moroccans spoke Berber. Is that not
Only
the case?
parts of Morocco that speak Berber.
Okay.
So up in the mountains in the north of Morocco, as well as in the middle.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I didn't know that. See, that's a learning.
I was born in a city, so it was directly Arabic as well as French.
Okay.
So
Arabic and French.
took
and then
French.
some Spanish now, and trying Polish.
So the third language would be English, but then others choose either German, Italian, Spanish. They may have introduced now Mandarin and as well as Japanese possibly, but
Okay.
I'm not sure. I believe now they may have also introduced Berber to the curriculum, because I do see on the school signs they do have in Arabic as well as in Berber now.
Okay, interesting.
So
Yeah, so it's definitely a very multilingual, multicultural, very much a mixing pot kind of a country and culture is my
Correct.
understanding.
correct.
And you're right on the doorstep of Europe, right? So historically, a lot of Americans who were thinking like, man, I want to experience the East and that whole Orientalist idea of like what the Middle East and Arabs are. A lot of it's like Morocco, Casablanca. You know, they've
Correct.
seen movies. We'll talk about movies in a little bit, but and they think of like the Casbahs and all the little souks, and
Correct.
Morocco is a very like picturesque, iconic kind of place for people
All
to
the
go.
colors and
Yeah. Yeah, and all the geometric
image of the
patterns.
Oriental. Correct.
Yeah, well, that's awesome, man. That's really awesome.
Yes, yes.
And your connection to Polish, can I ask why you're interested in learning Polish? Just
so
curious.
my wife is Polish.
Okay.
We've been married for 15 years now. So
Oh, mashallah.
been trying to pick up some words, but it's just
I think I know like Jak się masz.
extra much.
That's about it. And believe it or not, like my mom's side of the family is Polish.
Oh, okay.
So I
Awesome.
have some connection. Like I've never been to Poland. I want to go someday. But like my mom's side of the family is Polish. So,
I was there in 2018. It's a beautiful place.
oh, really?
Beautiful.
Yeah, I got to get there. Like I have Polish
So
friends
many
who are like, Omar,
mountains
you've
and
got to go. You don't understand. It's so
correct.
beautiful. It's, you know, the cities, the outside life, cafes, coffee shops,
Super
everything.
clean, super organized.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It was a
I'll make
beautiful.
it there someday. We'll get there.
It was a beautiful 2 weeks.
And it's also a good connection to have in this area. I've noticed since moving to Chicago and especially this area of the suburbs, like there are so many Polish people and shops
Correct.
and businesses and like the people who did my kitchen, the people who did like a bunch of stuff for my house when I bought a kind of dilapidated house that ended up being renovated.
Okay.
There were some Arabs that did work for me, but then there was some Polish folks that did work for me too.
Correct.
And they are like craftsmen, like really, really attention to detail. Some of the most amazing attention to detail craftsmen, efficient, like contractors that I've come across in the area. So I encourage people like to look. Not only, I know a lot of Arabs listening are like, we look for Arabs.
My in-law is actually has a company that does construction. And
oh, really?
They do a pretty decent job.
Yeah. The Polish, they have a knack for certain
clean
things.
job.
They do a solid job on certain things, man.
Absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
Yeah, definitely look up your local Polish contracting company if you want some hardy, solid contracting work and kitchen work. So you've been in Chicago for a while. You've been in America for a while. You have an interesting background. And going back to kind of when you originally reached out to me, you talked about the sense of disillusionment. And I can't tell you how much I feel a similar sense. People I've talked to feel a similar sense of disillusionment. Friends, family, people of all walks of life, really. It's not just unique to one community, I think, at this point. Mm-hmm. You brought a couple of books. And so maybe to start us off, the first one that you showed me that you really wanted to share and thought was interesting was this book called
The Real Bad Arabs.
Real Bad Arabs, real spelled R-E-E-L. Can you hold that up or let me hold it up here. This book, Real Bad Arabs, R-E-E-L.
10 pages.
Referencing movies, how Hollywood vilifies a people. What is it about this book that made it something you wanted to bring and share? And what are your kind of thoughts on it or takeaways?
So my thought is, first, it's just that the vilification is so ingrained that's been going on from the 40s, even possibly before that, that there's more that needs to be done from our community and from other communities to share what our religion is, what our culture is, and just invite others inside to show them exactly what our religion is or, what our culture is. Because it's just so vast that it's just hard to describe in a few hours. Right. We could sit here and make it a podcast of 10 hours and we won't be touching not even 5% of what needs to be discussed.
That's true.
How we could possibly change people's perceptions, people's minds, people's
hearts.
You just can't.
Yeah.
There's no way.
Yeah.
There's no way that two of us or even 100 of us or even 1,000 of us could, flip the switch on something that's been going on for a century.
Yeah.
Possibly
so
more.
You're saying from your perspective, if I'm reading you right, is like the sheer volume and length of time that this kind of messaging has been out there is incredibly difficult and challenging to overcome. Like it's an uphill battle.
Absolutely.
And it will take an entire community, a village, to be able to turn the script on this narrative.
It'll take generations.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think we live in an information age. Obviously, it's a cliche to even say that, but I think that we as people forget how powerful the messaging that you get when you're a child is. I think of like when you brought up this issue of movies, right? When we were talking before the interview, it's one of the most, kind of passionate, topics that I'm passionate about, I should say, because I love movies. Who doesn't, right? I grew up watching movies,
absolutely,
absorbing Hollywood culture and Hollywood kind of framing of different issues. Grew up in the Midwest in Iowa. So like if you could see one Muslim on screen or a dude named Muhammad or a dude named Omar, it was like, oh my God. You had to point at the screen, be like, Mom, Mom, Mom. They said Omar. There was a guy named Omar. It was like a big deal back then, growing up in the West, in America, to see like a Muslim character or an Arab character, especially one that isn't portrayed in a bad way, but portrayed like as a neutral character, just a side character,
which is
whatever.
very few.
Very few. One of the funniest ones that I talk about that I'm sure you've seen it. Do you remember in the early 90s, there was this movie. It was a Kevin Costner movie about Robin Hood. It was a Robin Hood movie with Kevin Costner, famous back then. And I looked this up one time. I came across it randomly. I can't even remember. I think I was like messing around on IMDb, looking at movie reviews or something. And I came across Robin Hood, and it won some kind of like a multicultural like Muslim award from like a major Muslim organization back then, because it had that one his like sidekick guy who dressed, he was like, I think from North Africa, or he was supposed to be like the guy who went to the Crusades.
I don't recall this movie.
Yeah. So Kevin Costner playing Robin Hood. It starts off where they're in the Crusades and they're in like a dungeon captured by like someone. I can't remember. I think it's the Muslims, and they're cutting hands off. Literally, this is the beginning of the movie. They're chopping hands off, and somehow Kevin Costner, he ends up being able to be like, rescued from that last minute hand chopping or something, if I remember correctly. And then the guy who helps him escape is a Muslim guy, and he ends up going with him back to like medieval England to like help him with whatever his objective was, and ultimately ends up like leading the rebellion against the evil king and doing all the rest with Robin Hood. And because of that portrayal, which was a very caricature, like simplified, cartoonish portrayal of a Muslim, like they had him praying and the praying was all wrong. It wasn't even technically correct back then. And they still, the Muslim organizations of the United States, bless their hearts, they gave an award to the movie just because it portrayed Muslims in a positive, helping light versus, but it was so inaccurate. Like if you watch it, you'll laugh. It's so inaccurate, but that's an example that sticks out. Are there examples in your mind?
I'll definitely look at that movie again. I mean, there's so many. It's just that I really can't think of a specific one at this moment.
Like Schwarzenegger comes to mind, like the action flicks from the 80s.
I mean,
Stallone.
absolutely.
You've got you got the
Van Damme. You got Chuck Norris.
Chuck Norris is probably the worst. That was like even before Schwarzenegger and
cheesy
Stallone.
Movies, yeah.
Cheesy action.
They were
movies.
super cheesy. I couldn't even watch them.
Yeah, you can't.
I tried about 20 years ago and I couldn't. Yeah. It was already.
Where when they kick someone, it sounds like a gun went off, or they punch someone, it sounds like a bomb went off. It's just so over exaggerated.
See, I grew up. Our movie theaters used to have two movies. First one would be an action movie, so either Schwarzenegger, Chuck Norris, Van Damme, and then a second 15-minute break, and then a second Indian movie. So that could be 3 hours up to 4 hours. And that's how they literally took our minds off the issues that we were supposed to be
at the time back then
dealing with back at the time.
Yeah.
And that's, part of the brainwashing too. And, it's just.
I think the biggest brainwashing to me is just the constant, steady portrayal of Arabs or Muslims in these movies from like going back as, if it's a good portrayal that we would be like somewhat okay with, it's their kind of ignoramuses. They're kind of either in the early movies like servants and kind of like almost side kind of sort of slaves or serfs to like the colonial class or the aristocratic class in a given movie. And then when you get further along, you get into more of like the constant terrorism theme, right? Where it's just someone's gunning down the terrorists, or the terrorists took over a plane, or the terrorists, you like think of like True Lies with Schwarzenegger where, the terrorists, Crimson Jihad was the name of the group, and they're trying to, obviously there's money involved. They're trying to get money, or they're trying to threaten, the entire city of Los Angeles or whatever with missiles, because that's what terrorists do. And they don't even have them. They got like Crimson Jihad, and they're supposed to be like Middle Eastern, but then they're played by like Indian extras, Indian actors.
They couldn't probably get any decent Arab to say, sure, I'll take that role.
They weren't dignified enough to find like an Arab that would be like, I'll portray my people as being terrorists. Sure, they find someone else. But yeah, those movies did a lot of damage, I think, in ways that people just don't fully
It's
realize.
so unconscious at this point. It's
Right.
And sadly, it's so ingrained, so deep in us that sometimes you catch yourself misjudging a person based on a character from a movie.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a work in progress to, detox your brain from all those misconceptions. And
It is. And I think we all can get
it's a
them.
constant work.
Right? To be fair, like I'm saying, I think of misconceptions I have even that have been completely shown to be not true whatsoever. Like I gave an example in one podcast earlier about, I think it was my brother. Yeah, my brother, he was up in the Wisconsin Dells with his family, and someone was like circling around them, kind of paying a lot of attention to like him and his wife. His wife wears like a hijab and jilbab, like the full Middle Eastern and Muslim clothing. And this person was like all tatted up. They had all kinds of like, necklaces and piercings and cross tattoos, like Christian tattoos and all kinds of stuff. And for those listening, for your average Muslim, right? Like we don't wear tattoos mostly for the most part. People are pretty like conservative and just like plain Jane. And when you see someone like that, you're kind of like, well, why is this person around me? Why are they circling around me? Why are they like paying attention to me? Do they possibly have like a sense of like, having a problem with me, or is there racism involved? You just get your alert level goes up a little bit because it's intimidating a little bit. I think for a lot of people still with like tons of tattoos to approach someone, for people who aren't used to that, right? Now people who are heavily tattooed, be like, psh, nothing to be afraid of. They're the nicest people. I mean, I know from stuff I do in my social life outside of work, tons of people, friends of mine wear sleeves and tattoos. It's becoming a different thing nowadays. But back in the day, it was maybe a little edgy or whatever. And this person was like, finally, they started making contact and saying like, can I help you? And she was like, there's a woman. She's like, I just want to say, I'm so sorry about everything that's happening. And just started like pouring her heart out about how she follows everything that's going on in the Middle East. She started talking about how she collects money and puts money together for charities to send money to Gaza aid trucks. Like I'm talking about completely just like mind blown kind of moment for my brother and his wife going, that was like the last thing we expected from that person based on how they presented. And that's us as Muslims and as Arabs having our own cognitive biases against another people or towards other people by the way they present, which it's a learning moment. Like if other people have that about us because of the way like our women dress traditionally, or the way men present with a beard, or they don't go get fully naked at a pool or whatever, or more conservative in how they behave outside, what are other people? We got to do it. We got to meet them halfway, right?
Well, when you look at it, it's been conditioned that way for different reasons, in order to, it's still that old mantra of divide and conquer. So it's making different people scared of different people.
Right.
Making Moroccans scared of Algerians, making Moroccans scared of this, and so on and so forth. It's just a non-ending battle. And it's just people have to find their common grounds. At the end of the day, it's humans. Mm-hmm. We're all trying to live better lives, grow our families in a better environment that we find it. And sadly, it seems like with the current election, it's heading the other direction, unfortunately. And it's just people have to still keep coming together and organizing locally.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. I think there's a really important discussion to be had about local, the whole think global, act local, which is becoming ever more prescient and important as we look at, what's going on in our midst as Americans. And we'll get to that. I do want to stick a little bit on this point about propaganda and movies and TV and pop culture, because one other example that I think is worth discussing is, and a lot of people don't realize this, when you're young in America, like I think I have kids now and they're in school, right? So what were some of the things that I've had to like sign off on for like my kid to go on a field trip, my kid to be able to see a movie at school that's a little bit above the rating of like what's appropriate for their age or whatever. When I was growing up in school, this is in the 90s, I remember in like 6th grade, we had been introduced already at that point to Holocaust movies. Okay. And when I think back to it, I'm talking about movies like, it's called like Escape from Sobibor. You've got the, Schindler's List, other movies in that kind of genre. And I start thinking about it, I'm going like, right now as a parent, I have, kids who are young and in elementary school and stuff. What kinds of movies and violence would I accept for the school system to be showing my kids, just in general, about any conflict, any people, any issue? It would be very slim. I would be very skeptical of public school showing certain movies to my kids. I'd be definitely wondering, like, why are they showing this movie to my kid? What's the message? What's my kid going to take away? Is it appropriate for them? Those kinds of things. And this whole programming thing that you mentioned, it really brings that to mind, where one day I'm sitting there and I'm going, man, from when I was in 5th or 6th grade, I was already being introduced to essentially what is propaganda about a certain group of people and their suffering, which I'm not trying to take away from any group of people's suffering. We're all human beings. And I think that certain people have gone through very terrible suffering, and it should be studied, and it should be a lesson for all of humanity. But what I'm calling attention to here is just thinking now as a 38-year-old, man, how old was I? And I was already getting, like, with a group of 25 other kids, sitting there watching these movies that had violence, extreme violence being perpetrated and portrayed on people, innocent people in the movie, with the dogs being sicked on people and gas chambers and people crying as they were being led to death. And I'm just thinking, like, what is the agenda behind exposing kids at that young of an age to that type of content, over and over in pretty much what the equivalent of liberal arts classes were at the time. And so it's really shocking. I mean, I don't know, in Morocco, did you have anything like that growing up? Do you feel like there was like obvious propaganda that, even though the message could be good in a vacuum, right? The question has to be asked of, like, why is this being shown and why at this age, since it's such a formative time for little kids to be developing their identity and their feelings and thoughts?
I mean, I don't recall having to watch movies of the Holocaust at school. However, there was the programs that we were watching. I mean, Tom and Jerry, in fact, has a lot of, it looks like an innocent cartoon to anyone.
Sure.
However, there is a lot of different messages. I won't go down that rabbit hole for now.
Feel free if there's anything interesting. I mean, we definitely know from Tom and Jerry that bulldogs are bad, because bulldogs are the enemy of Jerry, or Tom, rather. But I'm sure you're talking about something deeper.
It could be. It could be just, conspiracy theory, as they say.
Which are all coming true lately. If you go online, everyone's like, all the conspiracies are coming true. Oh, my God. So you're definitely not alone.
Like as a teenager, I was always following Friends, Prince of Bel-Air, the nerdy stuff, I guess. And when you watch that stuff back, there's a lot of unconscious stuff that's being passed on to us about culture, about accepting different things that may not give us the satisfaction of true, deeper meaning of life. Mm-hmm. It was all pretentious. And again, we go back to that disillusionment. It's all pretentious. It's all just for show. It's all the material, just outside layer, just like an onion. You just basically just staying at the outside layer of that onion and not going inside to understand that we all are sharing the same issues, regardless of our status or our jobs, or whether blue collar, white collar. It's like the stress is deep and it's real, and everything that's being thrown at us today is just, you mentioned the information. I feel like it's an overload of information. We don't even have time to process that information at this point.
It's very true, yeah.
We're just counting on the AI now to just sprout the answer. AI is doing a job to take in as much information as it has based on the input that it has, and it's going to give you that information, but it has not it does not have our emotions. It does not have our so many other layers that it might not ever reach.
Yeah.
Because we still don't know much about our people's brains.
Yeah, just
Will we
beginning to
ever?
scratch the surface, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it just feels like everything's just disillusionment.
Yeah.
And, everyone is trying to deal with it their own way. But again, we have to have open spaces where we could discuss these issues and might not find the answers, but we might work toward the answers.
I think that's really, that's deep, right? So there's a lot there I want to touch on. One is the layers of the onion, right? There's so much about culture nowadays that, like you said, is superficial, right? I think one of the biggest things that I lock onto now that I'm 38, approaching 40, having my own little midlife crisis, you could call it, of like,
you're having it early then.
Yeah, you're having it early, and it's like, man, because you see 40 and you're like, that's half my, if I have a good shot at a long life, inshallah, you say, okay, if God gives you a long life and health, you live into, like, say, your 80s. Hey,
That's
who could ask for more, right?
I've lived the half already, right?
You've lived half of it already. That's if you live that long, over
exactly.
half. So it starts to get in your head a little bit, and I think a lot of men go through that at that age, maybe even women, but you start to think, and one of the things that jumps out at me is like how little death and the fact that we're all going to die really penetrates and gets into people's minds and is explored in this culture. I mean, I think, I don't mean about it like, oh, celebrity died. Like Val Kilmer just died, I think today or yesterday.
So,
it was all over the news. Great actor.
May he rest in peace.
Yeah. I mean, he was 65. A lot of people think, oh man, 65, I'm just going to start retiring and living my golden years at 65, and someone's gone at that age. And that's just how it is sometimes. But the amount of thought we give to death, and what I like to think about, more and more, is this world we live in is really just this rock with all the plant matter, all the animal matter, all I studied physics a bit in college, and you learn that like everything's recycled, right? You can't destroy any kind of matter. You can't destroy any kind of energy. Truly, it all has to be balanced at the end of the day. That energy can be converted to matter, matter can be converted to energy, but you can't completely get rid of and evaporate, truly take out of the equation either of them, if I understand my physics correctly. And so we're on this like rock floating through space with everything that's ever existed on Earth being here still. And humans just come in. It's kind of like video games where you spawn in and then you die and then you spawn back in and then you die. People are constantly spawning in and people are constantly tapping out. And it's just been recycled for thousands and thousands or millions and millions or billions of years. And we don't have that understanding. We always, I think, culturally come at this as like, you're always living your best moment, living your best life, pursuing the things, your dreams, whatever goals, eating, sleeping, drinking, having fun, buying things. But to really understand that, man, all of this, every single thing that we touch, that we do, that we interact with, we're going to be separated from it someday, and you won't take any of it with you. I think if that was part of the culture, at least that's my theory, is like more and more people thought about life that way and thought about the fragility and the how fleeting life can be, not to be depressed about it, but to think about it like, what's important, right? What's actually important, and cut down the noise.
And that's a deep thought as well, but that's where indigenous people come in. When you are indigenous to the land and you respect the land and you see the future in the land, you definitely respect it, nurture it, take care of it. Fortunately, this capitalist system, I feel like it's all about just production and just output, just getting that output higher and higher, and it's just a never-ending process of just consumption. And
yeah, it's almost like, it's like, where's the end, right? It's like, you've seen like the salmon.
there is no end.
The salmon that run up the river constantly, like on the nature shows, they want to spawn, so they go running they go from the ocean up the river and then back to like their original spawning where they were birthed or hatched from their eggs or whatever, and they go back there and lay eggs, then they die, right? The salmon. So I always think of it in terms of like that race upstream. You're just constantly chasing things, right? And it's like, You need a better car. You need a better truck. You need a bigger truck.
Never
You need a
ends.
better pair of shoes. You need a better job. You need a bigger house. It just doesn't end unless I think people start living more intentionally and deliberately and like in a way that's, self-reflective, to start to say, what do I want? When is it enough? What do I want to spend my time pursuing?
Correct.
What do I not want to spend my time wasting, right? Where do I want my attention focused? Did I give my wife her rights? Did I give my kids their rights? Did I give my body its rights? My health? Did I give my psychology and brain its right?
Absolutely.
Did I fulfill all the rights that other things have over me, not just my pursuit of X, Y, or Z, right? Like it's challenging to kind of keep a balance even.
And that's where the focus is all being put on. It's that hustle mindset, do more, never rest. But then at the same time, now there's a TikTok trend on how to take care of yourself, self-care, so it's a contradiction. How could you self-care when you are on a constant hustle, but then at the same time, it's just, there's got to be a balance.
Yeah.
I think it's that balance in life that we are missing now. It's the balance between the financial, the family life, the emotional life, as well as exactly what you want to be doing in life.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just you're just chasing the next dollar? You could have all the cars that you want. Would that make you happy? That's
Right.
the question. And I think at the end of the day, that's all we're chasing. We just want to be happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we want to know that we lived a life, because no matter what, right, you're going to have, time will run out for all of us. We want to know, did I do the most with the time I was given? Because you really can't,
Fulfillment.
there isn't more that you can do than that, right?
Correct.
You say, I have a certain amount of time. I can't control how much time it is. I can have an influence by not jumping off a cliff and maybe give myself more time by not committing suicide. But in general, even if you're the healthiest person on earth, someday you're going to get cancer, even if you ate all the right things, all the organic goji berries, you ate all the sardines.
There's an expiration date on every one of us.
No matter how many omega-3s you took, you're going to die.
Doesn't matter,
Yeah.
right?
And that self-care thing,
I was just reading someone, there's this lady that lived to be 104 years old, and she was a smoker 100 years out of her life.
Wow.
That doesn't mean that
Right.
many smokers died at 20 and
Right.
younger. So
It's a bell curve, right? There's always going to be those people who are the outliers.
correct.
Yeah.
But I mean, everybody has a expiration date, and everyone has to live their life the best they can before that expiration date reaches,
Yeah.
and have a purpose. And that's what's hard now, is just having that purpose. There's just not an empty, shallow purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That's a fulfilling purpose deep inside.
It's true. I spend a lot more time on this topic than I care to admit. It's a little embarrassing how much time I think about, like, man, what's my purpose? What am I doing? What do I need? How can I do better? Am I using my time wisely? Am I making the most out of my gifts, blessings that God gave me? All that stuff. Those existential questions are the ones that haunt me the most.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Probably a lot of other people too, but if they admit it,
I'm sure that the older you get, I guess the closer you get to that expiration date. So you do want to think back at your life and see what you have accomplished and what purpose did it serve, and is it helping you meet your Lord back in a good state.
So you bring us to a good topic. We're talking about death, which, not to depress everyone, but we'll kind of pivot it a little bit. What does it mean from your perspective? Curious to get your thoughts on being a Muslim in the 21st century, 2025 in America, in whatever context, I guess you want to answer the question. Like, to you, what does it mean to be a Muslim, and what does your spirituality or religion represent for you in terms of what we just talked about?
That's a deep question. I mean, I grew up in a Muslim country, so Morocco, as you know, Muslim country. But I feel like Islam was emphasized. It kind of fit into culture more than it was practiced as a religion with all the tenets. But I feel like Islam was emphasized, it kind of fit into culture more than it was practiced as a religion with all the tenets. We studied it at school, so I was at a generation where, they start closing down the little places where they, memorize the Quran. So I started in primary school. It was just another 1 hour class, just like math class, English, French, or we didn't have English back then, but just like any other, subject. So it did not have an emphasis on our upbringing the way it did for my parents or older generations. So when I came here, it was, I kind of deviated from, the teachings, and it was up until recently, I would say, that, I started regularly making the prayers and trying to understand Islam more in a practical form and not just in a theory form. There's a difference between just theory and studying all of that and between practicing that in real life. And honestly, the past 18 months, that's when it showed me that the true believers that I've always read about in the Quran, seeing them in Gaza and seeing them go through unspeakable atrocities, you just see that in practice, not just lip service. So it's been a struggle. I mean, and it is still a struggle. Going to the mosques, sometimes you don't see those values practiced by some, and it kind of is distraught. But all we can do is just focus on ourselves. So I have to get back and focus on ourselves, and it is a work in progress. I have so much to still detox myself out of.
Well,
And,
it's good to hear that.
Inshallah.
It sounds like you've found something that's really of benefit to you at this point in your life, and something that you're kind of rediscovering or discovering in a different way.
Reconnecting, I would say.
With.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. And do you think the cultural aspect of Islam is something that really just struck a chord with me? I think there's a lot that we as Muslims living in the United States, but even globally, Muslims who live in majority Muslim societies, I think we need to take a really long look in the mirror when it comes to a lot of different issues and ways of behaving and ways of thinking, to try to decouple the culture from the religion or from the faith and the spirituality.
It's so intertwined. It's just...
Yes. And so much of it, it's like the question is this Arab culture or is this really Islam? Is this Jordanian culture, Palestinian culture? I mean, for good and bad. There's good elements that, like, there's a fusion, and it kind of, the two strengthen and reinforce each other. But then I think there are some examples where maybe it's not helpful. Like, I'll give a simple example, right? A lot of Arabs will always laugh and joke about what time are we going to meet? We're going to meet at 5 p.m. American time or Arab time? That's a joke.
Is that why you were surprised that I was here on time? Exactly.
To a degree. I'm like, oh, perfect timing. The cameras are set. Let's rock and roll, man. Yeah, but no, I mean, we all like joke.
Because you sounded like surprised. Like, oh, you're here already? I was still going to be, I thought I was going to wait another hour before you show up.
You were on time perfectly, man. I appreciate it. But, we all joke
absolutely.
about timing.
It is a joke.
But is timing something from a religious perspective? From
Absolutely
from
not.
a Quranic perspective, or from a sunnah, like a prophetic tradition perspective, a Muslim should be on time, or should they be off time?
They should be on time.
Right? I mean, that's like one of the basic 101.
Correct.
That's one example. There's other examples.
When they give their word, they keep it.
Right. That's saying, like, I'm going to do this and this for you, and then in exchange, you're going to give me this much money.
Correct.
Okay, we agreed. And it doesn't change There isn't an attempt on one party to try to like get a little more work for free, or the other party to try to get a little more money for what they did. Like, we have this in the Quran, I might butcher it, hopefully not, where it says, وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ إِذَا كِلْتُمْ وَزِنُوا بِالْقِسْطَاسِ الْمُسْتَقِيمِ, right? So when you are doing trade or measuring things the way they used to use weights in the old days for doing sale of like different goods, weigh things, give them their due measure, weigh them appropriately. Culturally, there's so much haggling in the Middle East and so much like trying to, get the best deal out of someone else. I mean, if we're being honest with ourselves, we'd say, okay, is that really the Islamic ethos, or is that like a cultural ethos, right? And there's so much culture that's baked into the way people just operate, like as their boot programming from a computer in their head. We don't even think about these things, but I think there's so much of that that's like, if we want to be, what I would say when I was a kid, I always thought like maybe it's from going to mosque school or whatever, a masjid school, we were taught like a Muslim, and I think Christians were probably taught the same thing, and my Jewish brothers and sisters were taught the same thing when they were going through their own schools, is like an outstanding member of this community or this group of faith believers should be like a Jedi. You're like a Jedi, right? But of values and morals and uprightness and all this good stuff. And I think if we're looking at our perspective of like, man, I'd like to be a Jedi as a person of whatever faith, man, there's always a lot of work ahead of us in terms of turning certain things around. Like, there's so much that we can get rid of that's just not helpful. Being on time, making sure that if you agree to something, you follow through with it, you stick to your word, making sure that people aren't harmed by your tongue.
Doing great work.
Doing solid work, quality work, right? Attention to detail. إذا عمل أحدكم عملا فليتقن. The hadith of the Prophet, it's a famous saying, like, if you're going to do something, do it with a high degree of quality. To me, that one hadith could birth an entire ethos industry of quality control, right? Like the best quality control engineers should come from that ethos. But unfortunately, you go to a lot of areas in the Middle East, and quality control is like the last thing on the list.
Well, see, I recently got my realtor license, and one of the things that I have to take is the code of ethics. So there is a complete code of ethics that I have to abide by. And when you think of it, that whole code of ethics is within Islam on how we're supposed to deal with each other and how we're supposed to deal in contracts. If I give you my word, I have to keep it. I don't go talk behind your back. Mm-hmm. I don't, talk bad about your business. I don't talk bad about you. And so much that has to get cleaned up. But sometimes, is it just a cultural aspect of it, or it's pertaining to certain people? Because as Ibn Khaldun says, people with small minds talk about people with mid minds talk about the weather and events, and people with high minds talk about ideas. Mm-hmm. So is it just that specific
like a class
of people?
Yeah.
It doesn't have to do anything with their education level, status, or any of that. It just has to do with just the mindset.
Mm-hmm. I think there could be a lot of truth to that. I think a lot of what I'm discovering as I unpeel some of these things around like race in America, like race issues from like studying them and talking to people. The more and more you peel those things back, the more and more I think that it's about class more than it is about race. And you hear this with like the right and like MAGA movement and like Trump Republicans and stuff, and kind of this like reclaiming of like I think what is like white identity and culture in America. That's happening. Make America great again. All that stuff. I think that there's a degree of like, hey, look, is it that, I guess to put it a different way, I see a lot of similarities between the problems and the trappings that you see in like inner city, super poor, super underserved or deprived community kind of areas and cultures. In Chicago, you think of like people, let's be honest, people are like, oh yeah, that's a ghetto. That's where black people live. And look at what it is. It's so, and that racist kind of like immediate and knee-jerk kind of interpretation of what's going on. But if you go to rural areas of the Midwest and you go to poor white trailer court areas, I mean, I've been to some of those areas and there are some of the same trappings, drugs, households with one parent, father's gone all the time or not in the picture, generational poverty.
So the issues are all the same.
It's a class thing or a poverty or a deprivation thing more so than it is a race thing. I'm not denying that Black people have struggled with their own challenges and issues in this country for sure. And I think that other groups have too. But what I'm saying is a lot of the stuff, when you look at it globally, kind of 30,000 foot level to kind of look at it at like a socioeconomic and macro level, a lot of it is class related more so than obviously like because of the color of someone's skin or because of the way someone talks or an ethnicity or whatever it might be.
Correct. It just like, it seems like it was experienced by the Black community for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And now more other classes are experiencing it, more the other ethnicities are experiencing it in a different light.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so for you, going kind of tying back to what we were talking about Islam and being Muslim, what do you think being Muslim today means? I mean, what do you latch on to when it comes to Islam? Are you focused on the halal and haram? Are you more focused on the spiritual connection with God? Are you focused more on the ritual practices of prayer? I think everyone gravitates towards certain things more than others. But for you, what is Islam and what does being Muslim mean? Just curious.
That's a really good question, but I've been trying to latch onto it to clean my heart. When I read, إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ, the one who comes to Allah back with a good heart, with a clean heart. I don't want it to just be practices. Mm-hmm. The rituals, it feels like sometimes the rituals could be just empty. You just make the movements, you got them over with, you move on with life and start. It's the whole 9 yards. It's, the khuluq, the trying to get the essence of Islam as in dealing with people, being a better person to myself, to the ones around me, and hopefully sharing that light with other people. I don't want it to just be empty rituals, talk. So that's, mm-hmm. and it's a work in progress, as the Sheikh just during Ramadan says, it's there until the end, mm-hmm. until the last breath.
That's right.
You just got to keep fighting.
Yeah.
And
humans have to overcome their inner demons and pursue what's highest
and that's
constantly.
That's the highest jihad.
It is. It is.
That's the highest jihad. And it's just wanted to be a better person, apply that to myself, and then help others to, share the knowledge that we've learned throughout the years and not just let it go to waste.
And to you, to connect this also to being American, how do you, I think a lot of people are going, when you mentioned disillusionment at the very beginning, a lot of people are going through their own kind of like identity crisis maybe, I think at this point, in the West in general, but also in America for Muslims, for people who really are a super minority in this country. And a lot of the culture, the outward culture seems to clash and conflict directly with the culture that Muslims espouse and try to live up to. However, I do want to draw a distinction that I think we can get to in a little bit. But before we do that, what does it mean to you to be a Muslim and American at the same time?
So what you mentioned, it's actually one of the biggest misconceptions that I keep hearing is that this clash of Islam and the Western culture. And when it's possibly from the top layer, mm-hmm. when you look at things in a shallow way, it might seem that way. But when you look at it deeper, it actually sinks perfectly. And that gives you it opens your eyes of why many Americans, once they read the Quran and they understand the meaning of it or the deeper meaning of it, they just go ahead and take their shahadas at the masajids. So mm-hmm. there is a deeper connection there. To go back, my dad always told me just take the middle. So I have to go back. I was born in 79. So as you know, the Iranian Revolution happened in 79. So there is a vilification that was happening at that time during the 80s between Iran, Iraq. In the 90s, there was also vilification of the Muslims and all the events that were happening in Algeria. So in a way, people were trying to kind of distance themselves from Islam and just live Islam on an individual level and not on a collective level. Now, my dad always told me that the best thing is the middle. So, and in the Quran it says, "Kuntum ummatan wasata, ta'muruna bil ma'ruf wa tanhauna 'anil munkar wa tu'minuna billah." Another
وكذلك جعلناكم
advice.
أمة وسطا
وكذلك
تكونوا
جعلناكم.
شهداء على الناس. صحيح. Yeah. So the middle path.
So the middle path. So that's always stuck in my mind with the middle path. So I never looked at the extremes. I never liked the extremes. I always wanted to see try to see all type of, sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah, you're fine.
Try to see all sides of the issue and then try to analyze. There's always millions of perspectives. Come
Right.
on, we are 8 billion people.
Yes.
Each one of us with their own opinions, their own perspectives.
No, we don't have our own opinions. People don't have their own opinions. Come on. Yeah. No. For
But
sure.
at the same time, we all share so many in common.
Yes.
So, and so I have an uncle that lives in Canada, and he always told me just look at the best out of the American culture, look at the best out of your own culture that you already came with, that you've lived the past 19 years, and just find your middle path as well. So it's always been about finding that
The
middle path. And
And something you talk about with the middle path, I think from my perspective is, I've thought about this a lot, right, is the parallels that are drawn in the media between one group of people and the other. Usually there's a trick being done on people. And I would encourage the audience to try to just imagine or picture this. Come along this ride with me for just a second. Bear with me. It's like a card kind of a pool hustler or a card hustler, right? Someone who they're a real pro. They come to some unsuspecting person. They say, "Hey, you want to bet some money on a card trick or a card game, or I'm going to put these 3 cards out, or I'm going to get 3 cups and I'm going to put a ball in there and I'm going to move them around quickly, and then you try to guess which cup it's in, and they know you're never going to guess because they're probably not, the ball's not in any of the cups." Someone who's like a pool hustler who really knows their pool, they come in, "Hey, I'll bet you $10, da da da," and then pretty soon they've got all your money. I think there's something like that happens when it comes to taking a group of people, picking the most extreme element from that group of people, and comparing them to the moderate middle that you mentioned of another group of people. And I'll give an example of this, right? So when it comes to let's just say the one that's hot on everyone's minds right now is the whole Palestine-Israel issue. I think that for years, someone has gotten away with portraying the issue where when it comes to the Palestinians, they choose the most radical, militant, very battle ready, wearing fatigues, holding guns, faces covered. This is the image of the Palestinian side as portrayed in the media. And then it's compared with, on the other side, an Israeli or a Western country's grandma knitting club, women sitting around knitting clothes, or guys that are just farming, guys that are out there skateboarding. There's always this juxtaposition between huge contrast, right, in terms of how they portray it. The Palestinians or the Arabs, and they're always this bloodthirsty, militant, militaristic, super ready to go to battle type of people, right? And then the other side is, well, that's the Palestinian side, folks. And then on the other side is, here what the other side looks like. People going about their day shopping, people who just want to make dinner, people who live in suburban communities that are trying to, have fun and bring their kids to and from school. And it's a very clever trick, because when we as human beings think of empathy and think of relating to people, we think of the middle path. People who are just normal, you're the bell curve, the middle, the vast majority are not fringe, they're not extreme. They don't want anything other than to live their life in peace and live and let live. But by doing that sleight of hand, you automatically get people to kind of think, well, all those people are terrible, right? Look at what they are. When in reality, if you wanted to do a fair comparison between the Palestinians and the Israelis, you can't say what's a comparison between Palestinians and Israelis. You'd have to come and say, who am I comparing? An Israeli farmer to a Palestinian farmer? That's a comparison you can make.
Correct.
An Israeli businessman to a Palestinian businessman, we can compare those in a way. An Israeli professor to a Palestinian professor, very similar. But when you compare, let's just be honest.
IDF soldier to a militant?
IDF soldier to Hamas, there's more of a comparison in terms of the type of personality. Like I say to people, if you're going to compare and not to defend or build a case for terrorism, I want to be careful with people listening. What I'm trying to say is, if you want to do a fair comparison, right, between any society's people, if you're going to take Hamas on one side, for example, the people that I would compare them to in the United States or in Israel would be like Delta Force, Navy SEAL, super militaristic, people who are bred for war, born for war, love the fight, American sniper, hoorah, let's go to war and let's kill those people, elite units of special forces operators that you see online that are podcasting and having all kinds of fame right now. But I served in Afghanistan. Oh, Zero Dark 30. I helped get bin Laden. Those are the kind of people who they're a different breed of human being. If you're comparing those people to Hamas, I think in general, and I'm not trying to say that.
I would say that's.
But you get what I'm saying. I'm not trying to say defend the actions of one or the other or anything or condemn. What I'm trying to simply say is, or condone terrorism.
Compare an apple to apples.
Compare an apple to an apple,
Yes,
man.
sir. Yes.
Don't give me
I
an
agree.
apple and compare it to a baseball bat.
I agree.
Right?
I agree.
You want to compare grandma Israeli citizen? Compare it to grandma Palestinian citizen.
Well, just like how these children and women are being bombed. Okay, let's even say they are the children of Hamas leaders. Is it fair to just go and bomb every single one of these soldiers? It just doesn't make sense. Where does the line stop?
Well, they're terrorists.
Where does the line stop?
They're terrorists.
But then
terrorists have to be stopped at all costs. They all have to be wiped out. That's the argument. I'm saying that's the argument, right? So the argument.
And where does it stop?
Well, let me frame it this way. In my opinion, that this is one of the biggest crimes that I think has been perpetrated against the American public. In my opinion, right, is that first of all, I'm going to say something kind of controversial, possibly. I think that the word terrorist, has become so weaponized and so dangerous. I would argue that it's worse in many respects than saying the N-word about someone or to someone. The N-word, which has so much derogatory connotation and so much meaning in American culture and Western culture. In English, the N-word is absolutely abhorrent to so many people, right? Where even if a white person says it, Bill Maher famously, he said the N-word one time way back on one of his shows, and he was using it in a friendly, in a joking way, not to someone, but trying to claim it as a word I can use casually in a joke. And people absolutely hated that. I mean, black people were like, forget this guy. And so, but when you think about what does the N-word represent in American culture? It represents someone being a slave. It means you're inferior. It means you're there to serve me. It means you're there to do my bidding. It has all the connotations of hundreds of years of deprivation and rape and murder and inflicting pain and suffering and dehumanizing. But I will argue that the N-word today, let's say you have the most absolutely hillbilly, backwater, stereotypical redneck you think of racist person, and they're like, oh, that person's an N-word, and they use the N-word. To them, it may mean they're less than me. They're not as good as me. They're not as intelligent as me. But I would argue, and my brother brought this up one time, we're just having lunch, and he said this, and it was profound. It was like a gem of wisdom. Terrorist means that I can literally kill you, and no one asks a question about it. No due process, no questioning of your humanity, no questioning of guilt, of whether I was justified. And I can kill 100 other innocent people around you, as well and get away with it scot-free. Tell me if the N-word has the same power. I would argue that it doesn't.
Oh.
The T word does. And I think it's
Absolutely.
absolutely shocking to me and shocking to so many people that there was a terrorist there. So why did you kill that 100 people in that refugee camp or school that were congregating for whatever? Well, we had a suspected terrorist in there and we had to wipe him out. You took out 100 people with that person. Yeah, it was collateral damage, but it was a high priority target. As if every single person walking around Gaza that is part of, let's just say it, even if they're part of a designated terrorist group by the West called Hamas, as if it's like Jack Bauer in the show 24, where there's like a ticking nuclear warhead in New York and there's the terrorist that they're, you remember this show they would go after, and it'd be like, we have to torture this guy right now. Why? Because there's a ticking nuclear bomb going off right now in New York City. And if we don't terrorize this guy and torture him and pull his toenails off or whatever else, we're going to lose 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 or 100,000 people. So it justifies it. This was a post 9/11 kind of show that popularized this idea of like the terrorist, and as if everyone walking around Gaza is like that.
And that word has definitely been weaponized by the media, weaponized by the government.
Yeah.
And it's only used for a specific type of people, not for government entities, unfortunately, even though they may commit even bigger atrocities than any terrorist. It just doesn't get applied to them. So it has to be applied equally.
Yeah.
And
a double standard is
I know
the
if you
problem.
don't, do you listen to any of the comedians? So
yeah.
George Carlin, I mean, when he talks about the Israeli commandos and the Arab terrorists, or Sami Ubaid recently did a bit about, terrorism, the word terrorism, and how it needs to just be, according to him, we're all terrorists. Mm-hmm. So it's very unfortunate that a word could be weaponized. The same way with anti-Semitism. Mm-hmm. I mean, this show could be anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. Who knows? Mm-hmm. We could be saying the wrong word, and then, we get reported, and then it's just, where does it stop? Where does it stop?
And I think the amazing thing is, like, I have Jewish colleagues, friends, people that I value as close colleagues, friends of mine that I've worked with for years that I love to death as people. They're Jewish. I've had, Jewish professors who are my favorite professors that I ever had in college. I have, I love Jewish comedians, Jewish actors. I mean, the idea that you just because you are critical of certain policies of a government, right? And that government happens to be a majority Jewish country, means that you hate Jewish people or you're anti-Semitic, to me is one of the biggest weaponizations that has ever occurred in propaganda and use of terminology and words that I've ever witnessed. I mean, it's unbelievable how quickly people can be flipped to believe that certain people are anti-Semitic just because they have a problem with the policies of Israel towards the Palestinians. When ultimately it's a policy issue. I don't want that government to do X, Y, or Z. I don't think it's just. It's not fair. They're trampling on the rights of these other people. I don't want Israel to be wiped off the face of the earth. I want Israelis who've been there for now generations to live in peace and live peacefully next to their neighbors and all the rest that most of us in the middle would advocate for. But for even certain things like that, you're anti-Semitic. You really secretly hate Jewish people. I mean, it's absolutely insane.
It's mind-boggling. It is.
You mentioned something that was interesting, which is your average American and the way they perceive other cultures, the way, you look at the middle, and we talked about these parallels between like the extremes on certain sides and others. My big objective always in my personal life and even with this platform is to try to bring people together, to try to get people to see each other in a way that maybe they didn't before. And one of the things that strikes me as just absolutely mind-boggling is there's almost like a complete erasure of all the ideals. Like we talked about, what does it mean to be an American? That's what kind of got me on this side tangent is, for me, what it meant to be an American, and I'm an American before any other identity of nationality. I mean, I'm a Muslim first, and after that, really, I'm an American. When I go to Jordan, or if I go to Palestine, or I go visit another country, I don't think like an Arab. I am very much like American identity.
You were born here,
I was
right?
born and raised here, right? So I was raised on, all of us. You brought this up, Real Bad Arabs, this book about Hollywood, but the goodness of Hollywood, the movies, right? Like Dances with Wolves. Dances with Wolves was the most beautiful film, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful films of the 90s that was all about Native Americans and how this guy who was a Civil War soldier, I don't know if you've seen the movie, but he ends up basically going out into the American frontier.
See, a lot of the American movies I watched were in French. So,
so you're like, oh, you mean the French movie? That great French actor, Kevin Costner.
I have to see.
Yeah. No, but it was a movie that was so beautiful. It's about this guy who goes out to the frontier, the prairie, and he ends up going from hating and fearing Native Americans, maybe not hating, fearing Native Americans, to then becoming one of their brothers and joining their tribe and shedding all of his culture to want to be like, live the way they live because they live so peacefully and so beautifully. Like, forget the romanticization and maybe the exaggeration of what that is. But I'm just trying to say the beauty of the message.
Okay.
Right? When you're a minority growing up in the United States, we're like, man, those indigenous people, this guy, he was able to cross that cultural divide and see them for being human beings, more human even than maybe what his society had become because of industrialization or maybe a little bit pre-industrialization, but because of their, the war and all the ugliness of it and what, the greed and the skinning buffalo and leaving them dead on the prairie, all that stuff in the movie, he was like, that's not a human ethic or a human way of living. That's inhumane. Look at these people. They live sustainably. They live off the land. They love each other. They care for each other. They're one hand together, all that stuff. Another movie that comes to mind is Braveheart. What American has not seen Mel Gibson in all his glory in Braveheart talking about freedom and talking about what will you do without freedom and what, we want a country of our own and the independence that Scots wanted from the English and all the oppression of the English. Think of The Last Samurai, right? Tom Cruise. The Last Samurai, joining the Japanese and learning all their skills, and then wanting to fight against the imperialists and the colonialists. You look at Behind Enemy Lines. This was a movie with Owen Wilson where he goes in behind enemy lines, I think, into like what was like the Bosnia massacres occurring in Europe. Like, it's loosely based on like Serbia, Herzegovina, all that.
Memory is super vague on all of these movies. The main one I remember a lot is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. That was
a classic.
I think I may have seen that a dozen times.
That's
or
a good
more.
one, man.
That
That's
was
a
one
classic.
of my dad's favorite too.
Yeah.
At the time, so
it was so good. The hanging scene with the.
But then when you think back at it, it was a brutal movie in a way. There is some brutal scenery, and it shows men's greed.
Yeah.
And what man is capable of, I guess, when they want something to just themselves.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, but I mean, what I'm trying to get at, Mounir, is like you have all these movies that glorify like respect for human rights, freedom, liberty, the oppressed getting justice, the oppressed finding their independence or their sovereignty, liberation, all these themes that were so beautiful in these movies. And to me, if you are a salt of the earth, red-blooded American, if you're a Republican, if you're a military veteran, to me, you should 100% be pro-Palestine and pro-Palestinian when it comes to that question that we keep bringing up, versus being pro-Israel. And I don't mean it in the sense of you have to not be for Israel in any capacity. But what I'm saying is, if you study the issue and you open your heart and your mind and you look at it close enough, there is no way you could convince me that the Palestinian story isn't represented in all those movies more so than the colonialist, settler, Israeli story or narrative. I'm not saying that there aren't beautiful narratives probably in the Israeli story of how they live and their life and their sacrifice and all the rest. What I'm trying to say is, if you want to say who matches more the story of Mel Gibson in Braveheart and William Wallace, is it the Palestinians or is it the Israelis today? Hands down, you give me 1,000 people and you poll them, 999 of them are going to say it's the Palestinians that represent that ethos and that narrative, not the other side, given the way everything has played out over the last decades, not just a few years.
Correct. I mean, you could see the courage, the perseverance, the bravery, all of these American ideals that we have read about, we have heard about, you see them truly in regular people.
Yeah. And especially when you
And
look at like, you see these people that are so big in the United States about like land rights and like Second Amendment, gun ownership and my land, get off my land, the whole ranch culture and farm culture. You see it in like shows like Yellowstone that's been made famous and it's viral at this point.
Kevin Costner
Kevin
is in that
Costner.
one, right?
Yeah, he's in that one too. It's like, hey, are you trespassing on my land? He pulls out the gun or gives him a kick and like, get off my land. And that concept of like trespassing and land ownership and landowners' rights and this is mine and that's not
even
yours.
the freedom of speech.
Freedom of
which
speech.
used to be the main First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of the press. We see all of those just being dismantled in front of our eyes. Now, there is news organizations that are being kicked out, and where are we heading? Where does the line stop?
Well, I think it goes back to what we were talking about. Once you've convinced people that a certain group is terrorist or terrorist sympathizing, you're going to get when you're have you ever been to like one of those Brazilian steakhouses?
Correct.
Where they have the card? You use the terrorist word and people just put up the green card. More meat. Give me more. Give me more. Keep bringing it. You need to be able to flip that card to red or your stomach's going to explode. Like we got to get people to detox, like you said at the beginning, from these ideas that are antiquated, they're inaccurate, they're broad generalizations, but they're very effective at getting people to believe a certain thing another, demonize and alienate another type of, dehumanize another group of
if you repeat a lie long enough, it becomes kind of a reality, especially if you don't take the time to truly, dive into that lie and, try to analyze that lie. You just hear over and over. A lot of people are listening to these talk shows, talk radio. The whole time they just repeating same talking point over and over. Imagine hearing pretty much the same talk.
Yeah.
On a daily basis, 365 for 20, 30, 40 years. I mean,
yeah.
It becomes your being. It becomes every fiber of you. It becomes that.
Yeah.
And it's hard to just break it just with one interaction, with one podcast, with one movie, with one, and as you've seen, there is 10 pages there of movies. So hundreds of movies, hundreds of news segments.
Yeah, for those who didn't see this, so he brought this up to me at the beginning, which is fascinating. He went to the back of the book, and this book has an index of films from A to Z, and there are literally 10 pages in small print of movies going back all the way to like the 1920s or however early they started making movies, all the way through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 40s.
And keep in mind,
of movies that portray
this
Arabs
book is
or Muslims.
from 2001. So imagine how many other movies and series have been since 2001 to now. Another 24 years of.
Right. Oh, yeah. It would probably be post 9/11 period. I mean, it was just crazy.
And now with the AI, it's unlimited.
You have another book with you that you brought that says "Who Speaks for Islam?" Can you explain to me why you chose that book and what you think that is worth sharing?
So this book, I read it about 10 years ago. I will have to read it again, but it's just who speaks for Islam? Who speaks for me? We are 1.5 billion people, individuals. We are each an individual. Nobody speaks for anyone. I mean, we share common things with all humans. We all have our own desires, wants, needs. We share humanity. We all share that in common. But each person is literally living their own struggles in their own way, whether it's within their own family or within their own selves or within the community or within their country. And it's still an answer that I'm still a
Exploring.
question that I'm still exploring.
Is
Correct.
who speaks for
Who
Islam?
speaks, who, correct. Because when I go to masjid, and I've been to multiple different, there's all different types of ethnicities, all different cultures, all different mindsets. And, you know, you just see the diversity. It's just so mind-boggling that you cannot just box it, you know, just box a whole diverse group into anything. It just has to be, you know, lived and explored. And
Yeah, I think even for me growing up in America, I think I was in a very different community than the one we live in currently. I think there definitely was this idea that a Muslim looks and acts and fits a certain mold, like looks a certain way, acts a certain way, fits a certain mold.
correct.
And I think as I've matured in my perspective and grown up and mixed and experienced, I mean, I had a very good exposure to like different cultures and backgrounds growing up, but I think my Islamic identity and understanding was very much like, this is what a practicing Muslim looks like. And if you don't look like this, then you must not be a practicing Muslim. And you must therefore, in some way, I was a compassionate, very open-minded person in general, but you still have that like point of being like judgmental about, oh, that's not the same level of person or Muslim as this person who's really a good person. And, you know, that kind of like childish, ridiculous kind of notion of who's right, who's wrong, who's good, who's bad, to try to put people in buckets because it's easier for our amphibian brains, as they call them nowadays, to kind of wrap our heads around things. But I think that as you mature and get older, you realize that, man, it's so much more complicated, and it's so much more beautiful than trying to simplify it so like that. One thing I struggle with now, that especially having kids, is what does the future of America look like for Muslims? What does Islam look like in 100 years for Muslims in America? So once you've possibly shed all the culture and you're no longer like, oh, my parents were from the Middle East, or my dad was from the Middle East, or my mom, it's I'm 4, 5, 6 generations down, removed from the immigration experience, and I'm Muslim living in America. What does that look like? And it goes to the question is, who speaks for Islam in that scenario when the culture's been stripped away, right?
That all depends on what we do with our Islam over the next generations coming up. Will our children keep the Islam, or will they keep the culture, or will they keep either one of them? Or will they just be 100% American that don't want anything to do with religion, which we see a lot of those examples as well. It's a good question. I mean, it's all up to what we do for the next generation and how we get them prepared to, you know, pass on the message to the next ones.
Well, do you think, let me ask you this, in your mind, do you think that it's possible to be, I mean, I have my own perspective, but I'm curious to see what yours is, to be 100% American and 100% Muslim at the same time?
Absolutely.
Okay. I was curious.
Absolutely.
I wasn't sure if you which way you came on that, fell on that question. Can you explain a little bit your perspective on that?
So again, I mean, the American values of courage, bravery, speaking your mind, and it's all embedded within our Islam. So again, things get complicated. You know, when we talk about American culture, are we just talking about rap? Are we just talking about, alcohol, drugs, rock and roll? Which aspect of American culture are we talking about?
Right.
And a lot of people might not agree with every single aspect of the American culture. Not everybody is an alcoholic. Not everybody is a drug addict. Not everybody indulges in all types of pleasures. Mm-hmm. So for those people, they could see Islam as definitely as a match,
antithetical or
as
yeah.
a basically an exact match to what they believe in.
Yeah.
It might not be practiced correctly 100% around the world, but again, it's a system that's perfect. The people are not. And, it's all incumbent about every single one of us to, just strive to be the best they can. And again, that's all we can do, is just strive to be the best we can. And
I think that's a key thing that we're struggling with as a community, though, in terms of Muslims living in the West and living in America. You said, I agree with you 100%. I was actually expecting maybe something a little different from you, but I agree with you 100%. Like, I think you can be 100% Muslim and you can be 100% American, and you can be a proud American and you can be a proud Muslim and practice being American or in its fullest and being Muslim in its fullest. Correct. And an example that I think we as Muslims fail to bring up often, we always look at this period of like the post-prophetic period where there was like this rapid expansion of the Muslim empire across the world, across the Middle East, out into like Asia, all into North Africa, et cetera. And that was a very different world and a different scenario or setup, right? Than when you look at the story in the Quranic tradition of Joseph, the prophet Joseph in English, and in Arabic we say Yusuf alayhi salam, where really he was the perfect embedding of a Muslim, a believer, a person who's of God, a righteous person, into a non-believer or non of that religion, let's call it, society. And he went from the bottom because of the circumstance of his brothers in the well, throwing him in the pit, and then ultimately he gets sold into slavery, so to speak, or whatever you want to call it, as a child, and makes his way into the land of Egypt, and then gets raised in like one of the most noble homes, and that was like that initial seed that allowed him to climb the ladder. Goes to jail. I mean, it's an amazing story. It's the most beautiful story.
It is,
and ultimately becomes the right-hand man of the king of Egypt, where I think there was a story or an interpretation that I read where they said that the only difference between Joseph and the king of Egypt was the throne, meaning it was a symbolic difference in terms of the throne. But practically, in terms of how everything was being conducted, Joseph was running the kingdom. So that's a different example of Islam and a model for what Islam looks like than the one that I was raised on. And when I'm trying to think of how I want to raise my kids in the United States and what example do I want them to live up to, I think that's a much more complicated, nuanced, beautiful, possibly even more powerful, transformative version of what it means to be Muslim in a society that's where you're a minority than the example of like, it's us against the world. We're constantly under attack. Batten down the hatches, get in your foxhole, be careful, suspicious, everything's a threat, like that kind of dark, more xenophobic way of looking at your identity.
See, there was an element of fear when I think back of even our schooling system back in the 80s and 90s, there was always an element of fear. Fear of getting good grades, fear of not getting the homework done, fear of, just failing the class. And it was always, it feels like it was a fear way of, I don't know, raising us, which kind of didn't help in many different aspects. And
so a lot of it, you're saying that in Morocco, growing up, it was all
correct.
Fear was the way that the main
correct
theme of the day for education, for child rearing.
In a way, it is.
Yeah.
In a way, it is here too.
Yeah.
It's that fear that you don't get good grades, you're not going to be able to get to good schools, you're not going to have a good future. When in fact, it is not about the good grades. It's not about the status or that job position, but about being able to, like you said, get into a purpose, have a much bigger purpose than yourself, and contribute to this place that you're going to live in, whether it's through educating your kids in a good way that they're going to be able to pass on that to their next generations. But it feels like it's just that fear, it keeps you within the box. It does not let you explore. Or
do you think Islam in general, from what you've been studying and more recently kind of come in from maybe a bit of a new perspective, do you think that Islam encourages, I'm not talking about Muslims, I'm talking about Islam as a way of life or as a religion, that it encourages freedom of thought and exploration, or that it discourages and only uses fear? Which one do you think?
Unfortunately, what I'm starting to come into the conclusion of, and again, it helped me with a book that I read recently in Arabic.
What's the name of it? We can link it in the video when we post the video.
I could send you a picture. It's نحو مشروع جديد للنهضة by Dr. Nabil Alqam, I believe. I could send you a picture of it.
Sure, that'd be great.
So this book basically states that Islam and Muslims in general today are still living by the interpretations that took place 400 after Hijrah. So it's, while the Quran is a living book, good for every time and day. So it has to be read with today's reality, and not just, we're just taking what's already been given to us 1,000 years ago and still just recycling the same information over and over. I mean, I understand that, there is tenets in Islam that do not change. However, there's a lot of it that, changes with the time.
Yeah,
and
I think
able to, not change, but bring it to the actual reality of what we're living through.
Do you think it's because of culture, or do you think it's a human nature to kind of project their own desires or their own wants or needs or fears or whatever onto in their interpretation of the religion or of scripture, that causes that effect where people feel like maybe it's not as dynamic, not as changing, not as flexible? Where do you think that comes from? So
from the business perspective of side, it feels like people are always reluctant to change. If a company tries to put in a new software, a lot of people will try to resist that change until they know that they don't have any choice. Then they will learn it, right?
Yep.
So there is that element that a lot of people are resistant to change because this is what we grew up on. But when you read through the Quran, you find that it says, there are verses that, pretty much warn people, if you found your parents on kufr, on this, on that, would you still follow it? And I'm not saying that we are currently, in kufr or, out of the, out of the religion, or we are deviating, much, but I just feel that there is so much that needs to be, I wouldn't say updated, but again, just study it with a different lens. Just with a different lens, just have today's experts in certain subjects, whether it's sociology, humanity, psychology, just look at those subjects from a compass or from a perspective of the Quran. And that's...
what I always think of when I try to talk to people like non-Muslims and tell them about Islam and what's beautiful about it and maybe what they misunderstand about it. I always try to give this example of, have you seen those, you've probably seen some of those alien movies where the first contact is made between an alien species that just came to Earth and the rest of humanity. Like I think of the movie Arrival. I think of movies like Contact, the famous movie, where it's like, what if you, Mounir or Omar, we were put into this room and we say there's an alien in there. We don't know how to talk to them, but we want you to establish contact for the first time. It's like, oh, what is that going to look like? Then they bring in like the mathematician, the physicist, the biologist, somewhat linguist to try to crack how do we speak to the aliens, right? I'm not trying to bring a crude analogy or in any way to be disrespectful of God, but what I'm trying to say is we know that God is different than us. He's laysa kamithlihi shay. There's nothing like him. There's nothing that resembles him. He's a very unique being, right? When we look at God and trying to communicate with humanity through scripture, and we think of it as people who believe in the Quran or believe, if you're a Christian, believe in the Bible, if you're Jewish, believe in the Torah and the Talmud. We are literally, in our minds, trying to take something that is divine and interpret it for us, right? So the question for me is, how much do you think of God as being this eternal, powerful being versus limiting God by projecting your own limits on what it is that he's trying to give you? And I think that's the transformative, powerful part of the Quran, of our book as Muslims, is that it's so unique compared to other books. It would need its own podcast for many hours just to touch on that.
Absolutely.
But we'll save that for another day. But what I'm trying to get at is, do we as Muslims do the mistake or the folly of limiting what we could be and what religion could be and what it can deliver to us and to mankind in terms of positive things, because we put our own human limits, whether it's based on interpretation, whether it's based on us not living up to the standards, whether it's because we're, just ignorant, whatever. And how much is left on the table because we do that versus being more open-minded and trying to approach the Quran as something that we know is capable of being so much more transformative and changing people's lives and the world. What is it that we're missing that's not necessarily allowing that to be fully manifested? I think about that a lot, especially nowadays. Like, how much of it is us, right? Versus what could it be if we got out of the way and let our own psychology wrap around Islam and God's message in terms of being able to lift us up in a different direction and solve some of our problems?
It's a good question. I mean, when you think of it, again, we're still interpretations that we are living on are old interpretations, and it's great that we have the Hafiz, and it's great to have competitions and encourage children to memorize the Quran. But what's good is it being memorized when you don't understand the words of it? Mm-hmm. Is it still having the same impact? Mm-hmm. When we, as anyone that's reading the Quran, how much do we contemplate on the Quran? How much do we truly try to take that story and apply it to today's life? Mm-hmm. Instead of just putting a lid on or just looking at it as, something that happened, the Pharaoh. We're not in the Pharaoh times. No, we are in the Pharaoh times. Mm-hmm. There are pharaohs living amongst us today.
What you just said is critical. You said, is it just old stories? And actually in the Quran, there's a verse where people who are rejecting the message initially in the scripture that was being delivered, they said, in huwa illa asatir al-awwalin, right? It's only stories, little fables, parables that are being brought up about the old ones, the ancient ones.
The myths, myths of old age.
The old ancients, yeah.
Correct. And sometimes, again, I go through myself. A lot of times I've read the Quran and it's just, your mind is just not there with it, or you kind of think of it as not applying to you. Mm. Now, again, recently I've been trying to apply whatever or try to view what the verses that I'm reading as they apply today in today's life. And
how's it going? Is it? I mean, do you feel like it's coming along for you, or where do you go to kind of get a deeper understanding? Are there other books that you go to, or do you reach out to other people, scholars, local people that are more versed in stuff? Like, where do you go to? So
mainly, Mounir Alliti is one of the guys I listen to. He's been doing long series on the Quran and the Quranic explanations for over 10 years, I believe. So um, and none. Or I'll just, again, read it another time, and just every time, if you feel like you get in a different perspective. And that's, again, another thing about perspective. There are millions of perspectives. There's not just one, two. And sometimes we stick to our perspective like as if it's just the only one,
Yeah.
as if it's the only correct option. And we miss out on a lot of learning.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, I remind myself of all of this that I'm saying first and foremost.
No, I know. It's a good discussion. It's a good point because the Quran is so complicated, so deep. There's so many different areas to explore and realms and layers of knowledge you have to approach it and get certain extractions out of it. The more your knowledge grows, the more extraction you get. As you get deeper, it never ends. It's a never-ending kind of well that you can draw from for spiritual revival and for understanding and everything else. I think the big thing that I try to teach my kids when it comes to the Quran that I'm hoping to teach them is the beauty of thinking about it in a deep way. Like when Allah says, أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ, right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what's the verse? I'm forgetting. It's do they not ponder the creation of the heavens and the earth? رَبَّنَا مَا خَلَقْتَ هَذَا بَاطِلًا سُبْحَانَكَ. I want my kids to have a deeper understanding that is not just, this is forbidden, this is what you must do. Did you pray 5 times a day? Did you do this? Did you make wudu properly? And just like kind of harassing. And
that goes back to that fear factor that I was talking about earlier.
Right.
That fear in everything,
Right.
Yes, the halal and haram, it's left and right. But even when you look at the Quran and you truly contemplate it, eating a pig is permitted in dire circumstances.
Sure.
Well,
you're on a tropical island and you've got nothing but wild boar meat.
Correct. And you're about to starve to death.
Right.
Correct. So it is permitted. It's not halal. But we find ourselves just literally spending hours just discussing the appearances, how long your beard is gotta be, or how many times you gotta do the wudu, or it's just details sometimes that are unnecessary. I'm not taking from the importance of them, but again, there's much more issues that we need to tackle that are, hitting our community even harder, and we should be focusing on that stuff instead of just arguing about
stuff that's been argued about
details,
for 1,000 years.
Exactly.
Yeah, since the
Small
medieval times.
details.
No, I agree. Is there? We're approaching kind of the end here, and I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you feel like you want to address or talk about that we haven't touched on. Because I think we touched on a lot. I think our listeners are probably like, their heads are spinning at this point in terms of all the different directions we went. But I think it was a beautiful conversation. I really enjoyed talking to you.
With everything happening in the world, there's just so much to talk about. And like I said, we could sit here for hours and we won't even touch on
the surface.
Not even the surface of it. I think one of the main things that I wanted to bring up is these phones, the phones and what they are doing to our kids and what they are doing to ourselves first and foremost.
Right.
You could see what they've done to older people that have lived life without the phone. So I can't even imagine what they are doing to these 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4 and on. It's like we're watching a human experiment happen in real life.
It is.
And we're going to look back another 10, 15, 20 years ago and be like, how did it happen? Well, it's happening right now. And again, the reason I'm saying that is I've spent, 10 years on Facebook, 5 years on X. And, and you look back and you're like, what did I gain out of all those hours that I've scrolled up and down, those screens? And it's like, okay, kept up with what's going on with the world, but how did that benefit me in the long run? And it's just, I don't know, just it took me away from being able to read books. And it's like my focus now, I don't know if it's the Asian or, the consequences of the the social media or a combination of both, but I feel like it's doing a lot to our kids. And
for sure.
It's
a
parents
constant
should
battle.
start watching it.
It's a constant battle for me in my household. Like one of the rules we have is, and I think if you're being very deliberate and you're studying what's going on carefully, you'll come to the same conclusion. And what I mean by that is, there is a very famous kind of viral documentary that went out. I encourage everyone who's listening to share this episode as broadly as possible, but also share this podcast link. I'll put in the bottom of the show. I think it's a guy named Tristan Harris. He was popular on a lot of the big podcast king podcasts like Joe Rogan and Lex Friedman and all the rest a while back. I think it's Tristan Harris. But there's this Netflix documentary, you can look it up. It's about, and I'll try to put a link in the video for this podcast, about the dangers of the algorithms on these phones and social media sites and the addictive nature that's been engineered into them. And he interviews like executives at the highest level that now no longer work for those companies of Facebook and Google and these different companies. And they're like, the people who invented this stuff are saying they won't give their kids a phone.
Oh, absolutely.
Or they say to them, so, do your kid have an iPad? And he's like, are you kidding me? I don't give my kids iPads. That's for an adult. That's a dangerous thing. Like, that's not just something you give a kid.
Correct.
And these are the people who invented the technology.
Oh, yeah.
The CEOs don't give
Jobs
their kids.
And Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, they've done on their interviews, they won't give their kids until they reach, I believe, 14 or 16 years old.
Yeah.
And then even then, it's limited.
Right.
Just 1 hour to just get the work done and then over with.
Yeah, and I see a lot of that.
These are the people who have made it.
I see a lot of that in our community, especially. I think there's maybe a general just lack of awareness, and it's not like, not to knock people in any way. Like I love our community, and I love really everyone who's trying to be a parent right now. I struggle with it myself, and I know they struggle, and the struggle is real, and we empathize with each other. Because I'm in that same place and I get it. But like the screens, man, it's a constant battle. And I think I encourage people, we lock them. No one in our family, like the adults, cannot have the phones just laying around where the kids know the passwords. Okay. The TV has a lock on it. There's no iPads laying around. It's literally under control. You have to be constantly aware of like how much access they have, because it's like giving crack cocaine to a drug addict who's dying for their next fix when it comes to some of this stuff.
That's exactly what it is.
It really is. It's scary.
But when you think of it, I was raised up on screens as well. It was just, except that it was different. It was a TV. You have to watch the program at a certain time. If you miss it, you're not going to watch it again.
Yeah.
So it was, in a way, organized. But with these phones and the availability of them and the infinity of programs, I feel like the infinity of programs is just...
doesn't end. And it's super addictive, and it's constantly more. It's crazy.
And every day, new content is being provided, and when does it end?
And it really is a drug. Like, I mean, you think about it when parents, if I go to a restaurant and I see this, and I'm not trying to like judge people, I'm trying to say like, I could be guilty of this. I am constantly monitoring myself to make sure I don't become guilty of that behavior as a parent. So it's not to judge anyone out there. It's more I'm trying to, as a human,
this was just
encourage
a reminder.
People, to like think about it. You know what I mean? Because I love people out there. I want them to have healthy habits with their kids, just like I want healthy habits for myself with my kids. And I'm definitely a work in progress myself too. But, you go to a restaurant and you see the whole family, like all the kids are just, each one has a screen, and the adults are having a good time and the kids are just zoned out on the screen. Now, we've all been in that situation where we're like in line at the bank and we need the kid to stop crying, and they're really, and okay, hold this for just a second. But to let it become a constant crutch where those kids are just literally stuck on that device because it keeps them quiet and pacifies them. Mm-hmm. And then you as an adult can have your fun time and your relaxed time or whatever time you're looking for. Man, it's a slippery slope. It's dangerous because that kid is, at the cost of what are you buying your your comfort and your quiet and your peace of mind. It's that kid's health and mental well-being and development. And
But the parents is not looking at it that way.
Yeah.
If they knew what the consequences are, they would look at it differently. But they just looking at it at the short term. They want the kid to be quiet at the time.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and it's
Especially if you have one of those kids who's got a really annoying cry. Have you ever mixed the people have you said you don't have any kids yet, but man, you get with couples and you find that one kid who's got that scream that's just like straight out of like a horror movie, demonic scream or cry, and you're like, okay, listen, if that kid wants a machine gun and it keeps them quiet and they don't shoot everyone, give them the machine gun, because I can't deal with that screaming anymore.
But see, that's where, again, raising the kid comes in.
Yeah.
Where does the raising the kid kicks in? You know, if we every time just hand over the phone.
Yeah.
When does taking the, I don't know.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's definitely something that it's a slippery slope. I think it's we've got to find a better way of redirecting their energy and their attention. And I think part of the secret thing, the secret sauce for us as parents is, if we're being honest with ourselves, is we have to be more engaged with them. I think there's you were talking about capitalism, and I think there's a lot of good about capitalism, but there's also dangerous, slippery slopes with capitalism as well, obviously, and problems. But it's similar to that, where like, if we're being honest with ourselves, we need to dedicate our time and focus to them and not farm out everything to other people, like programs and after school. Like, I know it sounds great, right? Like, you become middle class or upper middle class, and I can afford to send my kid to karate, taekwondo, piano lessons, Quran study, whatever. I'm not, probably not as big of a piano lesson type community, but we are definitely like Quran memorization plus, this and that and 50 other programs. The question is, are we farming everything out to the school systems and these after school programs, which some of them are value added and they're good, and don't get me wrong, but how much of my time is with my kid? Where does the parent come in? Is it just to spend money on programs so that someone else can teach your kids everything? Or is it, where's the value and time and connection that you're making with your kids? And so I'm always struggling with that, where people are like, oh, why don't you send your kid to this Quran or go to this or the mosque this? And I'm not knocking those programs. I'm quite the opposite. I think there's a lot of good in them, and there's a need for that. But what I'm getting at is there's got to be a balance. So we talked about at the beginning, the middle path. I think for me, it's always like, well, what would I be doing if I sent my kid to that? Is it because I'm busy working too much, trying to chase money? Is it because I'm consumed in some side project, like a podcast? Constantly just thinking about that, to be honest with yourself and to make sure you're not making the wrong decision for your kids, because it just feels good to send them off to another program.
I know.
It's scary, because then the time goes by and you're like, I didn't see my kids all week. The weekend comes, weekend programs. It doesn't end.
And the week just goes by super quick, and
weeks are like days.
You feel like you don't have any barakah in anything, no time.
Right. No. And then I think parents freak out when the kid gets to be a teenager, and then they start rebelling against them and stuff. And they're like, wait a minute. Why does my kid have no connection to me? Why aren't they my friend? Why don't they like me? Why don't I relate to them? Why don't I have a relationship with them? And it's like, sometimes it could be that the kid really, drifted away from you a long time ago and you didn't even realize it, because you haven't connected with them, had an honest conversation with them, tried to relate to them, given them your attention and time. We're all guilty of having shortcomings when it comes to this, I think, in general. So, yeah, it's a good topic, the phone topic, and one that we'll have to continue battling.
Oh, yeah.
For years.
Well, I mean, one of the things that I've been looking into is volunteering. And I feel like our community is not as involved in volunteering as you would think.
What kind of volunteering are you referring to?
All types of volunteering.
Like food banks and like...
food banks, there's the child care. They go out and give hot meals to homeless people around the city of Chicago. Possibly even animal shelters. All of these non-for-profit organizations, they do need volunteers to help out with the work. Mm-hmm. And these are, that's time, 3 hours, 4 hours, it could be whatever, that's away from that phone. Mm-hmm. And giving the kid a chance to meet other kids, contribute something selfless than themselves, chasing the next Jordan or
Yeah.
the next Xbox or
Yeah.
and I just feel like it feels like the whole society drifted from the volunteering thing.
Yeah. And I think also the engagement that you get as a Muslim community, engaging with the other community members, like Hispanic community, Black community, Polish community, whoever's around us in this area, the amount of value that you can get out of that long term in terms of relationship building and bridge building and understanding and all that is absolutely probably immeasurable. You can't even quantify it, right?
Correct.
And those human interactions and stuff and having a face out there. And I know there are people in the community that I've heard things, people are engaged in certain things. I'm not super connected to it, but through work and stuff, there are volunteer programs with my company. We've gone to like the food bank in Chicago and different things. And it's mind boggling just how much opportunities are out there, easy for you to plug into and participate in. And I think I think Yasser Qadhi, do you know that imam in America down in Dallas? He had a while ago, he had kind of like a long thing about like, if we're being honest with ourselves as a Muslim community, we're not as engaged in that kind of stuff as like the Christian community is or other communities for whatever reason. It's cultural, I think that.
It's not cultural, I believe. I think I'm kind of uncovering the reason behind it is... So they are 501c3. They collect funds. I don't know. I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine recently about the Mosque Foundation. And it's like, why do they keep collecting money every day? Why? Because they need to keep these programs going. Mm-hmm. But then why do they charge people fees because they have to charge it's like, people put themselves into this non-ending loop and then just discourage themselves from participating, whether through donations because, they have enough money. They've collected already $5 million. Mm-hmm. But it takes money to keep these programs going. It takes money to, grow these programs. Mm-hmm. The Mosque Foundation hasn't reached where it's at without, all this money being raised on a daily basis, on a monthly basis.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that's just how it goes. Okay, well, they have money to be able to hire people. Why do they need volunteers?
Yeah.
So it's like...
Yeah. Chicken or the egg to a degree. And also I think lack of understanding or transparency. What I'd love to do is for anyone listening, if someone listens to this and they have connections to like the mosques and the Mosque Foundation even, I'd like to in the future have someone on to discuss some of those details. Because I think you hit on something that's really important, which is, I've heard this too from friends and just different voices in the community where people have a lack of awareness or understanding. It's like,
or trust. Is it trust too?
I think it may be a degree of a lack of trust because of a lack of knowledge or understanding. It's like how they run. Like I think one version that I've seen is people that are coming from Jordan or Palestine or another, Muslim country where everything's run by the government for the most part in those countries in terms of religious mosques, maintaining the mosques, programs. There aren't really a lot of like programs from the mosque because over there you have like the entire public school system might even involve some religious study. It used to be more, now it's less, but still to some different than here.
Yeah,
here there's like nothing.
I grew up in.
Yeah. But I think people come here not realizing like if everyone doesn't donate and there isn't a continuous flow of money in, you get nothing in terms of not only the mosque, the services, representation, engagement. There's so many different layers to like what the community around the mosque provides. So I think I'd love to have someone on to discuss like the details of that, get people to understand the budget, understand some of the numbers, understand how much money do they need each year just to maintain the mosque versus the programs. What do the programs provide? Where does extra money go? How much money is given out in terms of food and charity? I think it's a lot of interesting stuff to unpack, but I'd love to get someone on who's like maybe tied to the accounting or finance or business side, the actual dollars and cents side of some of those nonprofit organizations to be able to speak to some of that. But
Correct.
Yeah, there's definitely room for more understanding and transparency around the issues so that you can then get hopefully more engagement.
And that's why I say, go volunteer. You know, you have questions about where the funds go see where the funds are being
people
spent.
Are the nicest people on earth. If
Be
you go
there.
talk to people and ask questions, and people will be more than happy to answer them. And
the same way with the Zakat Foundation or any other 501c3. I mean, they do have administrative fees that they have to pay out. So it's not 100% of the funds being collected by most charities go to help out people. They do have administrative fees that they have to cover, you know, whether it's traveling expenses, whether it's the supplies that they buy. Very few organizations are 100% volunteer run and just get funds from, you know, and zero administrative fees.
Right. Yeah.
It's not feasible in this country.
Right. There's a lot of overhead in America.
Again, it's, you know, it's part of that capitalist system. You know, you have
even in the nonprofit, there's it's expenses
there
never.
Are plenty expenses.
Bills don't stop.
No.
Yeah. Well, Mounir, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Omar.
Absolutely loved the conversation. I'm so happy we were able to connect, and we'll throw some links down for the books that you shared, as well as the Netflix show. And then there was that book that you mentioned by someone. There was an Islamic scholar or Quran the tafsir or something you were mentioning.
With the Nahda, yes.
Yeah.
نحو مشروع جديد للنهضة.
We'll make sure we put that in the link as well, inshallah. And
inshallah. Another, this is for, so 2 podcasts that I found very beneficial. We'll put the link to them as well.
Absolutely.
One is in Arabic, so for the Arab speakers.
Yeah.
And again, that's the one with Bawsal al-Qur'aniyya. So
I know that podcast. I just found that podcast. Is it called Bidun Waraq?
Bidun Waraq, that's the name of the podcast.
The name of the podcast. It's a great podcast.
And the professor, his name is Naif bin Nahar.
Yeah. I came across the episode. I caught a few clips, but I never got the time to watch it. But based on your recommendation, I'll check it out.
That is an awesome. I've listened to it twice already, and it's filled with gems.
Yeah, we'll check it out. And if there's, what's the other one podcast that you said there were 2?
Oh, the other one is from Mo Gaudat. So Mo Gaudat is used to be a chief business officer of Google X. Now he's on a mission to make 1 billion people happy. So his mission now is happiness.
Interesting.
So that's something that I'm also trying to live by, is just to live a happy life. My wife always tells me to smile more, because once I look serious, I look like I'm angry. She said, look like an angry Arab. So I guess, you know, we got to smile more.
No, too. Absolutely. Afshu salam, right? Afshu salam, and even a smile is
a charity. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a good deed. So
thank you, my brother.
It's hard. I guess it's hard with all the issues.
It is. They weigh heavily on the mind, and they kind of can bring us down day to day, week to week. But
we just got to keep
remembering
working,
and reminding ourselves.
Yes.
To
smile and
keep a positive attitude.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
Make the best of days.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, brother.
Thank you for having me.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Signing off, folks. Have a good night.